The cameras flash, but they only see the lie. They see Arthur Lexington, the billionaire king of New York, and his perfect wife, Eleanor, the picture of quiet grace. But tonight, that picture will burn. While the city sleeps, Arthur will be with her, the ambitious, intoxicating woman in a secret penthouse. He believes he is in control. He believes he has two women, one for show, one for pleasure. What he doesn't know is that by sunrise, the king will be a pawn, his empire will be cracked, and the only thing waiting for him at home is the end. The ballroom at the Metropolitan was suffocating, a familiar, cloying perfume of old money and new ambition. Arthur Lexington, his image reflected in 1,000 champagne flutes, felt the familiar tightening in his chest. It wasn't anxiety, it was boredom, a profound, crushing ennui that only a man who had everything could truly appreciate. At 52, he was the master of Lexington innovations, a titan of tech and logistics, a man whose casual whispers could send markets soaring or crashing. His suit, a bespoke creation from a tailor in Savile Row whose name he'd forgotten, felt less like clothing and more like a costume. He smiled, a practiced, automatic flexing of muscles, as a city councilman slapped him on the back. "Arthur, marvelous knight, the new wing is a testament to your generosity." Arthur merely nodded. The new wing was a tax write-off, a public relations maneuver suggested by his team. He hadn't even seen the architectural plans. His gaze drifted, snagging on his wife. Eleanor Lexington. She was, as always, perfect. Dressed in a severe, elegant column of midnight blue, her pale blonde hair swept back in a chignon that must have taken hours, she was the consummate society wife. She was discussing migratory bird patterns with the senator's wife, her expression one of polite, engaged interest. She was beautiful in the way a marble statue is beautiful, cold, flawless, and utterly untouchable. They hadn't truly touched in years. Their marriage was another one of his holdings, a legacy asset he'd acquired 25 years ago. It was stable, predictable, and utterly devoid of passion. The boredom was an itch. And then he saw the scratch. Across the room, standing near the silent auction display, was Isabella Vance. Isabella was everything Eleanor was not. She was fire and chaos, a rising star in his own company's marketing department. She was 28. Her dress was a scandalous, glittering crimson that clung to every curve, her black hair a wild cascade over one shoulder. She shouldn't have been here. This was an event for the senior board and their families. But Isabella had a talent for getting into rooms she wasn't invited to. Their eyes met. It was a jolt, a physical shock. Isabella's dark eyes held his, a silent, daring promise that bypassed the string quartet and the polite laughter. She didn't smile. She just looked. Her gaze traveled down his body, slow and appraising, before returning to his face. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile played on her full, red lips. She knew. He knew. The itch became a roar. Arthur felt his pocket vibrate. A text. He didn't need to look. It was her. "I'm bored, are you?" He navigated the crowd, a shark moving through lukewarm water, and intercepted his wife. "Eleanor, darling." He kissed her cheek. It was like kissing parchment. "I'm afraid something's come up. The Singapore deal. I have to jump on a call with Tokyo. It's going to be an all-nighter, I'm afraid." Eleanor's blue eyes, clear and unclouded, met his. There wasn't a flicker of suspicion. Or perhaps, he thought with a sudden, chilling clarity. There was nothing but suspicion, worn so long it had become part of her. "Of course, Arthur. You work so hard. Shall I have William wait up for you?" William was their driver. No, don't be ridiculous. I'll take a car. You stay. Enjoy the auction. Buy that hideous sculpture you were looking at." He patted her arm, a gesture of ownership, of dismissal. "It's a brancusi, Arthur," she said, her voice flat. "Whatever it is, bill it to the foundation." He turned, not waiting for a reply. He felt her eyes on his back as he walked away, a sensation like cold water. He shrugged it off. He was Arthur Lexington. He was entitled to this. He deserved a little life in his gilded cage. He pushed through the heavy bronze doors of the museum, the cool night air of New York City hitting him like a release. He pulled out his phone, his fingers already typing the message to Isabella. "My driver. 10 minutes. Meet me at the Soho penthouse." He didn't see Isabella slip out a side entrance. He didn't see his wife, Eleanor, standing perfectly still by the window, watching his car pull away. She didn't look sad. She didn't look angry. She simply watched, her expression as calm and placid as a frozen lake. Then, slowly, she lifted her own phone and made a call. "Marcus," she said, her voice quiet but ringing with absolute authority. "He's on his way to her. It's time. Execute the plan, now." The Soho penthouse was Arthur's monument to his own hypocrisy. It didn't exist on any of his official asset lists. The lease was held by a shell corporation, which was in turn owned by another shell corporation, a tangled web of legal entities designed to be impenetrable. It was sleek, modern and sterile, all glass and chrome and black leather, the antithesis of the sprawling, antique-filled Greenwich estate he shared with Eleanor. It was a place for transactions, not for living. When he arrived, the elevator opening directly into the living room, Isabella was already there. The crimson dress was pooled on the floor like a drop of blood. She was wearing one of his own silk shirts, unbuttoned just enough, and nothing else. "You took your time," she murmured, walking toward him. She smelled of expensive perfume and something uniquely Isabella, a coppery, electric scent that always made his pulse hammer. "The old guard. They talk," he grunted, shrugging off his jacket. He was already forgetting the ballroom, forgetting Eleanor. "Let them talk." She ran her fingers through his hair, a gesture both tender and proprietary. "They're dinosaurs. You're a lion. You should be with a lioness, not a museum piece." He laughed, a harsh sound. "Is that what I am? A lion?" "You're Arthur Lexington," she whispered, her lips brushing his ear. "You can have whatever you want. And you want me." He did. He wanted her ambition, which felt so much more honest than Eleanor's placid acceptance. He wanted her fire, which made him feel young, powerful, alive. The night unfolded in a predictable, intoxicating blur. They drank vintage scotch, the kind he kept stocked for exactly this purpose. They talked about her career, her brilliant new marketing proposals, which were really just his own ideas from 5 years ago, repackaged and presented with a dazzling smile. "The board is stale, Arthur," she said, tracing the rim of her glass. She was curled on the black sofa, her bare legs tucked under her. "Peterson, Davies. They're relics. They don't understand the new market. I understand it. We understand it." This was their game. She wasn't just a mistress. She was a corporate raider in waiting. She didn't just want his body, she wanted his keys. "Patience, Bella," he said, swirling the amber liquid. "These things take time." "Time is for the weak," she countered, her eyes flashing. "Eleanor has had 25 years. What has she built? A reputation for good flower arrangements. A seat on the opera board. It's an embarrassment. I could be your partner, really, side by side. Imagine the two of us. We could conquer everything." He smiled. He loved this about her, her naked, ravenous hunger. It was so simple. "And what about Eleanor?" he asked, playing his part. "It's complicated." "It's only complicated because you let it be," she scoffed. "You're a billionaire, Arthur. Buy her off. Give her the cold, empty house and the foundation. Set her up for life. A very comfortable, very boring life. She'd probably be relieved." He considered this. Maybe she was right. Maybe Eleanor would be happy to be put out to pasture. The thought was strangely appealing. A clean break. A new life. Him and Isabella, the new power couple. One day, he found himself thinking. Maybe one day. "You're pushing too hard," he said, setting his glass down. "Am I?" She uncurled and slithered onto his lap. It was a practiced, perfect movement. "Or am I just the only one willing to tell you the truth? You're trapped, Arthur, and I'm the only one with the key." He kissed her then, a kiss of ownership, of silencing. He was in control. He was the lion. He was paying for this penthouse, this scotch, this shirt. He was buying her time, her ambition, her fire. It was a simple, clean transaction. He was a fool. He didn't notice the way her eyes, even as she kissed him back, were cold and calculating. He didn't know that her brilliant marketing ideas were just the bait. He didn't know that for the last 6 months she had been carefully, meticulously copying files from the private server. She wasn't just ambitious. She was a saboteur. She wasn't trying to join his empire. She was building her own, using his resources as her foundation. And he didn't for a second realize that her greatest ally, the person who had first quietly pointed her toward Arthur's server access codes, was the same man his wife had just called. Marcus Thorne, Eleanor's lawyer, had a very broad definition of discovery, and Isabella Vance, hungry for her own piece of the pie, was his most valuable and most unwitting asset. She thought she was seducing a king to become a queen. In reality, she was just the jester, hired by the old queen to distract the court while the castle was being seized. As dawn approached, painting the Manhattan skyline in shades of bruised purple and grey, Arthur Lexington slept the sound, dreamless sleep of a man who believed, utterly and completely, in his own invincibility. The sun, a watery, indifferent eye, was just beginning to pierce the morning haze when Arthur awoke. He felt the familiar pangs, a dull ache behind his eyes from the scotch, a crick in his neck from the unfamiliar, modern pillow, and the sour taste of regret's ugly cousin, inconvenience. He hated mornings after. They were messy, and Arthur Lexington hated mess. Isabella was asleep, her dark hair splayed across the white sheets like an oil slick. She looked younger, almost vulnerable. It was an illusion. Arthur knew vulnerability was a weapon, not a state of being, at least not in his world. He slipped out of bed, his movements precise and silent. He retrieved his clothes from the floor, dressing quickly. The man in the mirror was a stranger for a moment, disheveled, his $5,000 shirt crumpled. He looked like a man who had been used. He smoothed his hair, buttoned his cuffs, and put the mask of Arthur Lexington Titan back on. He didn't leave a note. He didn't kiss her goodbye. The transaction was complete. The ride back to Greenwich was one he'd made 100 times, a grim pilgrimage from sin to sanctuary. His driver, a silent, stoic man named Thomas, kept his eyes on the road. The Bentley purred through the awakening city, crossing the line from the grit of Manhattan to the manicured, opulent silence of Connecticut. Usually on these drives, Arthur would feel a sense of smug satisfaction, of having successfully juggled his 2 lives. He was the master of his universe, bending it to his will. But this morning, something was off. The air in the car felt static. Thomas, who usually offered a quiet, "Good morning, Mr. Lexington," had said nothing. He had simply opened the door, his face a granite mask. As they turned onto the long, tree-lined drive of his estate, Arthur felt a knot of unease. It was too quiet. Usually, by this hour, 7 Abu Dharam, the grounds would be bustling, gardeners tending the heritage roses Eleanor was so proud of, house staff prepping for the day, security making their rounds. Today there was nothing. The gravel crunched under the tires, the sound unnervingly loud in the dead air. The house, a formidable Georgian mansion that had been in Eleanor's family for a century, looked asleep or abandoned. "Thomas, what the hell?" Arthur muttered, as the car rolled to a stop at the grand portico. Thomas turned, his eyes finally meeting Arthur's in the rear-view mirror. His expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Lexington gave the entire staff the week off, sir. Effective yesterday evening." "She what? Why wasn't I informed?" "She said you were aware of it, sir." "For the spring cleaning," Thomas said. The way he said spring cleaning made it sound like a eulogy. "She arranged for my final payment herself, along with my severance, a very generous package." The knot in Arthur's stomach tightened into a cold, hard fist. "Severance? What are you talking about, Thomas? You're not retiring." Thomas got out of the car, walked around, and opened Arthur's door. He stood there, no longer an employee, but just a man. "Have a good day, Mr. Lexington." He didn't wait for a tip. He walked to a small, nondescript sedan parked near the service entrance, got in, and drove away. Not once looking back. Arthur stood alone in the driveway, his crumpled suit a mockery of his power. The morning air was cold, and he realized he'd left his overcoat at the penthouse. Cursing, he fumbled for his keys. He never used his keys. The door was always opened for him. He let himself into the grand foyer. The silence was absolute. The air was cold. The heating was off. "Eleanor?" he called out, his voice echoing in the marble expanse. Nothing. The house felt hollowed out. He walked into the grand drawing room. Something was wrong. The walls were bare. The Monet, the two Rothkos, the priceless Degas statue, Eleanor's passion projects, the art she curated with meticulous care, were gone. Empty spaces and hanging wires remained, like scars. "Eleanor!" he roared, a flicker of real panic now. He stormed through the ground floor. The kitchen was scrubbed, empty. The pantries were bare. He ran up the grand, sweeping staircase, his heart hammering against his ribs. He burst into their master suite. Empty. He went to her walk-in closet. It was a cavern, racks upon racks of empty hangers. Every dress, every shoe, every one of her famous, elegant handbags, gone. He spun around, moving to his own side of the suite. His closets were untouched. His suits, his shirts, his shoes, all perfectly in place. She hadn't taken anything of his. She had only taken herself. He backed out of the room, confused. This wasn't anger. This wasn't a fight. This was an evacuation, an organized, systematic, and terrifyingly thorough disappearance. He walked slowly back down the stairs, his mind racing. Where had she gone? Her mother's place in Palm Beach? Her sister's in London? How had she moved all this? The logistics? It would have taken months of planning. He stumbled into his study. This was his sanctuary, the one room in the house that was entirely his, all dark mahogany, green leather, and the smell of old books and success. Here, at least, everything was as it should be. His awards on the wall, his decanters full, his massive, imposing desk sitting in the center of the room. And on the perfect, polished mahogany surface, placed dead center, was a single, thick, cream-colored envelope. It was the same stationery Eleanor used for her charity correspondence. But this envelope wasn't addressed to a donor or a duchess. It just had his name on it, written in her perfect, elegant script. Arthur. Arthur stared at the envelope. It was weighted, heavy, made of the kind of thick, expensive cardstock that screamed importance. It lay on his desk like a judgment. For a long, silent minute, he didn't touch it. He circled the desk, a predator suddenly unsure of the trap. He poured a scotch from a crystal decanter, his hand shaking almost imperceptibly. He never drank in the morning. He downed the liquid in one fiery gulp, the burn grounding him. Finally, he snatched the envelope. There was no wax seal, no dramatic flourish. Eleanor was never dramatic. She was precise. He tore it open, a gesture of impatient, angry power. Inside there was no letter, no tear-stained confession, no angry, capitalized accusations. There was only a thick, stapled legal document. The top page was a cover sheet. In the Superior Court of the State of Connecticut, Judicial District of Stamford, Norwalk. Case number FST CV 25608. Lexington, Eleanor M., plaintiff. For Lexington, Arthur P., defendant. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Arthur read the words, but his mind couldn't process them. Dissolution of marriage. It was so clinical, so sterile. It wasn't divorce. It was an erasure. His rage, which had been a low, simmering ember, exploded into a white-hot inferno. Divorce? She is divorcing me? He ripped through the pages, his eyes scanning for the words he understood. Irreconcilable differences, dissipation of marital assets, adultery. The word hung in the air. Adultery. Attached to the back of the petition was a separate motion, and behind that, Exhibit A. He flipped to it. His blood turned to ice. It was a photograph. It wasn't a grainy, long-lens shot from a sweaty private investigator in a trench coat. It was a crystal-clear, high-resolution image. It was him, last night, standing in the lobby of the Soho penthouse, his arm around Isabella's waist. He was kissing her neck. Her crimson dress was unmistakable. The time-stamp, printed in the bottom corner, read 11:52 p.m., just an hour after he had left the gala. He flipped the page. Exhibit B, a shot of him leaving the same building. The time-stamp, 6:48 a.m. This morning. There were more, dozens more, not just of Isabella. There was Caroline, the flight attendant from last year, on the balcony of his hotel in Zurich. There was Amelia, the wife of his London banker, getting into a cab with him in Mayfair. The dates, times, and locations were all meticulously documented. It was a portfolio of his sins. "How?" he whispered, sinking into his leather chair. The chair, his throne, suddenly felt cold and alien. How could she have known? How could she have proven it? Eleanor didn't understand this world. She was the gentle, naive wife who planned garden parties. She didn't hire PIs. She didn't plot. He scrambled for his phone, his fingers punching in the number for his lawyer, Gregory Walsh. Gregory was a bulldog, the best and most ruthless corporate lawyer in New York. He'd handle this. He'd crush her. The call went straight to voicemail. "Gregory Walsh, I am not available. If this is a personal matter, please hang up. If this is a professional matter regarding the Lexington Innovations merger, all inquiries are now being directed to—" Arthur crushed the phone in his hand. What was this? He tried his office. His assistant, Janine, picked up. "Janine, get me Walsh, now, and find out what the hell is going on. My house is empty, and my wife is—" "Oh, Mr. Lexington," Janine's voice was high-pitched, trembling. "Sir, I don't know what to say. The board called an emergency meeting an hour ago. It's about the morals clause in your contract." "The morals clause? That's standard boilerplate." It's meaningless." "It's not, sir. Not when paired with the injunction. Sir, I have to go. They're here." The line went dead. Injunction? Arthur returned to the stack of papers. He'd missed it. It wasn't just a divorce petition. It was a temporary restraining order and a motion to freeze assets. Pending a full forensic audit, due to extensive evidence of dissipation of marital funds, to prevent the defendant, Arthur P. Lexington, from hiding, transferring, or leveraging community property. He read that last line again. Hiding, transferring, or leveraging. He dropped the papers. The Singapore deal, the one he'd used as his excuse last night. It was a massive $2 billion acquisition. He was funding it by leveraging his personal shares in Lexington Innovations. The deal was set to close today. If his assets were frozen, he couldn't fund the deal. The deal would collapse. The stock would plummet. His partners in Singapore would sue. This wasn't a divorce. This was an assassination. He looked at the papers, at the photo of him and Isabella. The crimson dress, the careless, smug look on his own face. Eleanor. Eleanor had done this. The woman who arranged flowers. The woman who sat silently at dinners. The woman he had dismissed as a museum piece. She hadn't just left him. She had set a bomb, and he had just watched the timer hit 0. The silence of the house was no longer just quiet. It was the vacuum left by a detonation. He was standing at ground 0, 500 miles away, in a glass-walled office overlooking not the New York skyline, but the quiet, intellectual pulse of Boston. Eleanor Lexington sipped her tea. It was a simple English breakfast. No sugar. The office was not opulent. It was functional. Whiteboards covered 2 walls, filled with complex algorithms and market projections. The company name on the frosted glass door was innocuous, Aura Tech Solutions. It was one of dozens of small, ambitious startups in the tech hub, and it was entirely, legally, hers. Eleanor, dressed in a simple, sharp-looking grey cashmere sweater and slacks, looked nothing like the museum piece from the gala. Her hair was down, falling in a practical, business-like bob. Her face, free of the heavy makeup of her former life, was alert, intelligent, and focused. She looked 10 years younger. Her lawyer, Marcus Thorne, sat across from her. He was a man who looked more like a rumpled professor than a legal shark, but he possessed a mind of terrifying, systematic brilliance. He was the only man Arthur Lexington had ever truly feared in a negotiation, which is why Arthur had him blacklisted from every firm he worked with. It was Eleanor who had found him, teaching a quiet seminar on contract law at Harvard. The service was confirmed at 7:02 a.m. right on the doorstep, Marcus said, checking his tablet. Thomas confirmed visual. Arthur is home. Good, Eleanor said, her voice even. The injunction was filed at 8:01 a.m. The TRO was served to his office at 8:05. The board was notified at 8:10. The Singapore partners were served with notice of the asset freeze at 8:11 a.m. As of now, he checked his watch. Arthur Lexington is financially paralyzed. He can't access his personal accounts. He can't move his shares. He can't even use his Amex to buy a cup of coffee. Eleanor took a slow sip of her tea. And Miss Vance? Marcus permitted himself a small, dry smile. Ah, yes, the casus belli. Miss Vance's company-issued credit cards were deactivated at 8 a.m. The lease on the Soho penthouse, held by that ridiculous Shell Corp, was terminated by the landlord, who, I must add, is a new client of my firm, for breach of contract. A morals clause, if you can believe the irony. She is, at this moment, being politely but firmly escorted out by building security. Eleanor's face remained impassive. She felt no pity, but also no triumph. Isabella had been a tool, nothing more. A predictable, greedy, and necessary component in a much larger machine. She served her purpose, Eleanor stated. Marcus leaned back. I have to admit, Eleanor, this is the most surgical exfiltration I have ever seen. 25 years. You've been planning this. When did it start? Eleanor looked out the window. It wasn't a plan. Not at first. It was a realization. She told him. It had been 2 years ago. Not another woman. Arthur had always had other women. That was just part of the cost of being Mrs. Lexington, a cost she had been willing to pay for the stability, for the foundation, for the anesthesia. No, the moment had come during a dinner with their son, Julian. Julian, their only child, had been struggling, working at a small, non-profit startup in Boston, trying to build something real. He'd come to Arthur for a small bridge loan, $50,000, not to buy a car, but to make payroll for his 5 employees. Arthur had laughed. He'd done it in front of the whole family at Christmas dinner, laughed and called him a wasting his trust fund, a waste, a sentimental fool wasting his Harvard education. Eleanor had watched her son's face crumble. She had watched the light in his eyes go out, and in that moment she saw Arthur not as her husband, but as a blight. A force that didn't build, but only consumed, only tore down. That night she had opened a new laptop. She had started a new bank account with the inheritance her grandmother had left her, money Arthur had dismissed as pocket change. She had quietly finished the Masters in Computer Science she'd abandoned 25 years ago to marry him. She hadn't just been planning garden parties. She had been attending tech conferences for the foundation. She hadn't been buying art. She had been diversifying her assets. Auratech, her little startup, had just, 2 days ago, secured a patent for a new logistics management AI that was revolutionary. It was designed from the ground up to do one thing: make Lexington Innovations' entire business model obsolete. He didn't just cheat on me, Marcus, Eleanor said, her voice dangerously quiet. He bored me. He disappointed me. He thought I was an ornament. He forgot that ornaments are just waiting for the right moment to be taken out of the box. She had known about Isabella from the start. She had, in fact, subtly encouraged it. She'd made sure Isabella's project got in front of Arthur. She'd made sure Isabella was at the gala. She needed a final, undeniable, public-facing reason. She needed the adultery clause. So, Marcus said, pulling his notes back. Phase 2. The board. They're panicking. The stock is already down 15% in pre-market trading. They're going to want a solution. They are, Eleanor agreed. And you are going to give it to them. They'll want to buy you out. A quiet, massive settlement. Eleanor laughed. It was a sharp, surprising sound in the quiet office. Buy me out? Marcus, they don't have enough money to buy me out. I don't want his money. I have my own. She stood and walked to the whiteboard, picking up a red marker. I don't want a settlement, she said, drawing a circle around the name Lexington Innovations. I want the company. Arthur Lexington spent the next 48 hours in a state of suspended, primal rage. He was a cornered animal, and he lashed out at the only things he could: the furniture, his now unresponsive phone, and the hollowed-out house. He finally got hold of a third-string lawyer from his firm, a nervous young man named Peterson who was clearly terrified. Mr. Lexington, sir, I can't advise you. Mr. Walsh he's been retained by the board against you. They're citing the morals clause. Sir, the injunction is ironclad. Everything is frozen. Then unfreeze it, Arthur roared, throwing his empty scotch glass against the study wall, where it shattered, spraying glass. Sir, you don't understand. The judge who signed it. It's Judge Amelia Harris. The one your... My what? The one your pack ran a smear campaign against last year, Peterson whispered. She's not a fan. Arthur felt a cold sweat. He remembered. The soft on-crime ads. He'd personally approved the funding. Eleanor, she had known. She had chosen the judge. This was a vendetta. Then the calls started. Not to him, but at him. The first was from Isabella. She wasn't calling from a secure line. She was calling from a prepaid phone, her voice a hysterical, weeping shriek. Arthur, they kicked me out. They took my cards. They said I'm fired. You have to fix this. Arthur, you promised. You, Arthur snarled, his voice a low growl. This is your fault. That red dress. You were a setup. My fault. My fault. I'm the one who's homeless. You told me you were leaving her. You said we were a team. Get in line, Arthur said, and hung up. He felt a vicious, fleeting pleasure. At least someone was more miserable than he was. He was wrong. Isabella, he would soon learn, had not been left with nothing. She had her golden parachute, the server files she had copied. She wasn't weeping. She was negotiating. Her first call had been to Marcus Thorne. Her second was to the Wall Street Journal. The Journal story broke an hour later. It wasn't just about the divorce. That was lifestyle gossip. The Journal story was about Auratech. The headline was brutal. Lexington Innovations, Fatal Flaw. Auratech AI claims 40% cheaper logistics, headed by Eleanor Lexington. The article was a masterpiece of corporate destruction. It detailed, with surgical precision, every weakness in Arthur's business model. His reliance on outdated infrastructure, his bloated executive salaries, his refusal to innovate. And then it introduced the solution, Auratech. It included quotes, not from Eleanor but from two major clients Arthur had dined with last month, who announced they were terminating their contracts with Lexington and signing new ones with Auratech, effective immediately. The stock, which had been bleeding, now hemorrhaged. It dropped 30, then 40, then 50%. The board didn't just call, they convened, an emergency session via Zoom. Arthur, dialing in from his cold, dark study, was met with a wall of furious, terrified faces. "Arthur, what is this?" demanded Peterson, the board member Isabella had wanted fired. "Who is this woman? This Auratech?" "It's my wife," Arthur said, the words tasting like ash. "It's nothing. It's a vanity project. A hobby." "A hobby!" shrieked another board member. "Her hobby just cost us $4 billion in market cap. The Singapore deal is dead. Our lenders are calling in our notes. We're facing a liquidity crisis." "I'll fix it," Arthur shouted. I'll file a countersuit. You'll do nothing." A new voice cut in. The voice was calm, measured, and familiar. Marcus Thorne. "Gentlemen, apologies for the intrusion. My name is Marcus Thorne, and I represent the majority interest in this matter." "What? You represent Eleanor?" Arthur spat. "No, Arthur. I represent Auratech. And as of 9 a.m. this morning, Auratech has acquired," he savoured the word, "the outstanding debt from your Singapore partners. They were distressed. We were not. We also acquired the holdings of several of your more agile institutional investors who saw the writing on the wall. As of 10 minutes ago, my client, Auratech, is the single largest shareholder in Lexington Innovations." The silence on the call was absolute. Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. You can't," he whispered. "We can," Marcus said. "This isn't a divorce, Arthur. It's a hostile takeover, and you, I'm afraid, are the only liability left to mitigate. The board has already taken a vote. You are, as of this second, removed as CEO and chairman of Lexington Innovations for cause. Security is on its way to your study to collect your company property. Don't worry, Arthur, Thorne added, a sliver of ice in his voice. Eleanor has ensured you won't be left with nothing. You get to keep the house. Both of them. And the foundation. You know, for your spring cleaning. The call ended. Arthur was left staring at his own, pale, horrified reflection in the dark screen. The empire he had built, the one he had bragged about, the one he had leveraged to feed his appetites. It was gone. And the woman he had ignored for 25 years was now, quite literally, his boss. The final meeting did not take place in a courtroom. It took place in the main boardroom of the Lexington Innovations Tower, a room that had once been Arthur's personal temple. He had not been in it for 6 months. The 6 months had been clarifying. The press had been brutal. Isabella, in a tell-all interview, for which she was paid a handsome, undisclosed sum, had painted him as a manipulative monster, while simultaneously painting herself as a brilliant, wronged protégé. She was now the head of Vance Media, a consulting firm funded, Arthur suspected, by her settlement from Thorne. Arthur was a pariah. His friends, his allies, the sycophants who had filled his parties, they all vanished. He was left in the Greenwich mansion, which was no longer a home, but a mausoleum. The staff was gone. The art was gone. The life was gone. He had to learn how to work the coffee maker. He had been forced to sell his jet, his cars, his watch collection, all to pay the staggering legal fees and taxes on the pittance of shares Eleanor had allowed him to keep. He was no longer a billionaire. He was, by his standards, a pauper, a mere multimillionaire, trapped in a house he couldn't afford to heat. Today was the final signing, the papers that would formalize the merger of Auratech and Lexington Innovations, installing Eleanor as the undisputed CEO of the new combined entity. He was led into the boardroom by a security guard he didn't recognize. The room was full. The old board, his board, was there, looking sheepish and relieved. They were survivors, and at the head of the table, in the large leather chair he had commissioned, sat Eleanor. She was not the woman from the gala. She was not the wife from the mansion. She was radiant. Dressed in a sharply tailored, sapphire blue suit, her hair short and stylish, she was laughing at something Marcus Thorne had said. She looked vibrant, powerful, and happy. When she saw him, her laughter didn't falter. Her smile didn't dim. She simply nodded, a gesture of polite acknowledgement, as if he were a junior associate bringing coffee. Arthur, thank you for coming. Please, sit. She gestured to a chair at the far end of the table. He sat. The pen was placed in front of him. This is the final transfer, Marcus said. All business. You'll be resigning your last remaining seat, ceding your voting rights, and signing a comprehensive 5-year non-compete and non-disclosure agreement. A non-compete? Arthur's voice was a rusty croak. What am I going to compete with? I have nothing. It's a formality, Eleanor said, her voice smooth and strong. It was the voice of a CEO. We're protecting the brand. My brand. He looked at her, really looked at her. For the first time in a decade, the quiet, graceful woman he had married was gone. In her place was this empress, this architect. Why? He whispered, the one question that had haunted him. Why all this? Why not just take half and go? Eleanor leaned forward. The entire room strained to hear. Because, Arthur, you never understood. It was never about the money. I had money. It was about the waste. You wasted. everything. You wasted your talent. You wasted your potential. You wasted my time. She pushed the papers toward him. You built an empire on a shaky, selfish foundation. I'm just renovating. And the first step, she gave him a small, pitying smile, is to take out the trash. His hand shook. He thought of his pride. He thought of fighting. But he was so tired, and he was, for the first time in his life, beaten. Utterly and completely. He picked up the pen and signed his name, the last time Arthur Lexington would mean anything in this room. He stood up, a ghost in his own life, and walked out of the boardroom. No one said goodbye. As he waited for the elevator, he heard it. A sound he hadn't heard in years. It was laughter. Bright, genuine, full-throated laughter, coming from the boardroom. Coming from his wife. The elevator doors opened, and Arthur Lexington stepped inside, pressing the button for ground. Winter came to the Greenwich estate not with a gentle grace, but with a biting, personal vindictiveness. Arthur Lexington, now a man of 60, felt the cold in his bones. It had been a full year since the signing, a year since he had ceased to be the Arthur Lexington, and had become simply Arthur. The mansion was a tomb. He had learned, through a brutal and humiliating process of trial and error, that his existence was now governed by logistics he had never known existed. The heating bill for the 20,000-square-foot house was, he discovered, astronomical. Eleanor's lawyers had been almost comically literal. He kept the house, but not the means to run it. His life, once a symphony of effortless power, was now a solo performance of mundane, infuriating tasks. He lived in 2 rooms, the vast, professional-grade kitchen, where he now knew, intimately, the smell of burnt toast and instant coffee, and his mahogany study. He'd had a cot moved in. To sleep in the master bedroom, the one he had once shared with Eleanor, was impossible. It was no longer his. It was a museum of his failure. His days were a blur of empty time. He would wake, make his own coffee, and then, what? He would sit at his desk, the one from which he had once commanded billions, and now used to browse the internet on a sluggish, consumer-grade laptop. His black Amex was a relic. He now possessed a simple, silver debit card from a national bank with a daily limit that would have once amused him. He was, by any normal standard, still a wealthy man. The pittance of shares Eleanor had left him, after all, were in her new, skyrocketing company, Lex Aura. This was her final, most exquisite cruelty. He was chained to her success. To fund his own bleak existence, he had to watch her thrive. Every time he paid for his groceries, he was, in essence, cashing a check written by the woman he had dismissed as an ornament. His isolation was absolute. The friends who had once fought for a week on his yacht were now figments. He had tried, in the first few months, to call them. Their assistants, once deferential, were now polite, impenetrable shields. Mr. Peterson is in a meeting. Mr. Davies is travelling. They never called back. He was a ghost. One Tuesday, the humiliation became tangible. He had to go to the supermarket. He, Arthur Lexington, who had not stepped inside a grocery store since 1993, had to push a wobbly-wheeled cart down an aisle. He was wearing an old polo shirt and slacks, the only clothes that didn't feel like a costume. "Mr. Lexington?" a voice chirped. He turned. A woman, someone he vaguely recognized from the club, was staring at him. Her cart was full. His held only a frozen pizza, a carton of milk, and a bottle of scotch, the cheap kind. "Clara," he managed, his voice rusty. Her eyes, wide with a kind of horrified pity, raked over him. "Oh, Arthur, I didn't know you. Shopped. Just picking up a few things," he muttered. "We all heard what happened," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if he were a widower. "It's just awful. Eleanor, well, she was always a cold one, wasn't she? All of us at the club were just... Well, we're on your side." Arthur looked at this woman, with her carefully maintained face and her empty eyes, and felt a surge of rage, so pure it almost choked him. She was on his side. She who had fawned over Eleanor's garden parties? "Clara," he said, his voice dropping to the low, cutting tone he had once used to eviscerate board members. "Go. Away." She recoiled, as if he'd slapped her. He abandoned his cart and walked out of the store. He sat in his modest, American-made sedan, and, for the first time since he was a child, he wept. They were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, impotent rage. He was not a tragedy. He was gossip. He drove back to the cold, silent house. He walked into his study. He picked up his phone. He scrolled to a number he had not dared to dial. Julian. He pressed the call button. It rang, each ring a hammer blow to his chest. 1, 2, 3, 4. Voicemail. "You have reached Julian Lexington. I'm not available. Please leave a message." The sound of his son's voice, confident, clear, happy, was a physical pain. Arthur gripped the phone. "Julian," he began. His voice was unrecognizable, a dry croak. It's Dad. I just... What was he just doing? Apologizing? Begging? Demanding? I saw the stock price today. Good. That's good." He paused, the silence of the room roaring in his ears. "I'm at the house. If you... just call me back." He hung up. He knew, with a certainty that settled in his stomach like a block of ice, that his son would never call him back. Far from the Gothic silence of Greenwich, the Boston headquarters of Lex Aura was a cathedral of light, glass, and noise. Eleanor Lexington stood at a floor-to-ceiling whiteboard, marker in hand, deep in debate with a woman 30 years her junior who wore a T-shirt that said, "Data is my love language." No, Shanti, you're looking at the data lag," Eleanor said, sketching a frantic, brilliant diagram. "The legacy system can't process the predictive model before the shipment leaves the port. But if we integrate the Aura AI at the point of origin..." "We'd cut the processing time by 70%, Shanti finished, her eyes wide. "My God, you're right." Eleanor smiled, tossing the marker onto the tray. "Good. Implement it. I want the beta running in the Hamburg-Newark corridor by Friday." She was alive. Every cell in her body, every neuron, was firing in a way it never had before. She wasn't just a CEO. She was an engineer, an architect, a builder. She had not just taken Arthur's company, she had saved it from his neglect, transformed it from a lumbering dinosaur into a sleek, terrifyingly efficient predator. Marcus Thorne entered her office, which was not a mahogany box, but a glass-walled space in the center of the floor. "Julian's here," he said, smiling. Eleanor's face lit up, a genuine, unguarded radiance that transformed her. "Send him in." Julian Lexington was not the broken boy from the Christmas dinner. He was a man. He ran the Lex Aura Foundation, which was no longer a society wife's tax shelter, but a powerful, data-driven non-profit that was building sustainable logistics for developing nations. "Mum," he said, kissing her cheek, "you're going to be late. The Women in Tech Gala." I know, she said, gathering her briefcase. I hate those things." "You hate them, or you hate wearing the dress?" he teased. "Both," she admitted. "It feels frivolous." "It's not frivolous," Julian said, his voice turning serious. It's important. They need to see you. What you did." Eleanor paused. "What I did?" "He called, you know," Julian said quietly. Eleanor stopped fussing with her papers. She looked at her son. "When?" "Yesterday. He sounded terrible. Small." Eleanor looked out the window at the city, a city she was helping to build, a city that was hers. She felt a twinge, not of pity, not of regret. It was an echo, the phantom limb of a life she had amputated. "He is small, Julian," she said, her voice soft but firm. "He always was. We lived inside his shadow for so long, we thought he was the sun. It was our mistake, not his. Are you ever going to talk to him?" Eleanor turned and put her hand on her son's cheek. "I have nothing left to say to him. He is a part of my past, Julian. You," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You are my future. You are the point. Don't ever forget that." She picked up her bag. "Now, come on. If I have to go to this thing, so do you. I need my best-looking partner on my arm." As they walked out, a junior executive ran up. "Ma'am, the Journal is on line 1. They're reporting that Isabella Vance, Vance Media, has just filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy." Eleanor paused. "Isabella who?" she asked, without a trace of irony. "Vance Media? The PR... Never mind," the executive said, flustered. "Exactly," Eleanor said, not breaking her stride. "Hold my calls. My son is taking me to a party." And so the king was checkmated. Arthur Lexington, a man who thought he owned the world, learned he was just a guest in a house that his wife had built, and his wife had just foreclosed. He didn't just lose his mistress, he lost his pride, his power, and his entire empire, all because he underestimated the one person he promised to honor. This story is a brutal reminder. The quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous, and hell hath no fury like a woman who has been bored. What do you think? Was Eleanor a hero, or was her revenge too cold? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more stories of drama, revenge, and the shocking twists of real life.